Alright everybody, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are in Age of Wonders 4, continuing our multiplayer basics series. Now today we're going to be talking about Tier 4 tomes. Tier 4 tomes are obviously very powerful. You're going to get some enormously powerful units, spells, hero abilities. You'll get a lot out of your Tier 4 tomes no matter what, but they are very expensive to get towards. You need to have 2 Tier 3 tomes under your belt once you're trying to get into Tier 4 tomes, but critically you also need 6 affinity in the same affinity type as the tome you're trying to unlock. This means that if we want to get the Tome of Astral Convergence here, we would need 6 Astral affinity before we can even research this thing. That means that you have a little less flexibility when it comes to picking your Tier 4 tomes. You can't do the signature skill juggling that you can with the Tier 3s. You kind of need at least 1 tome, but I would say really recommending 2 tomes in order to ensure that you can get these. You can get the extra affinity from a hero who has the special affinity type, right? If you have an Astral Affinity Governor, then that's +2 Astral Affinity. You can of course get a little bit from your ruler as well, but generally speaking, you just can't get the 6 with a ruler alone. You need to give it a little bit of support, and that's where some tomes can come in. Now that said, our grading scale is going to have to also reflect not just the overall power of the tomes, because these are very powerful tomes in and of themselves, but also how they perform in the meta. Some of these tomes are going to be ubiquitously useful. The S tier tomes are going to give you access to powerful spells, powerful units, powerful hero abilities, and therefore those are going to be meta condensing, and the other tomes are going to struggle to keep up. A tier tomes are going to be pretty close. These are going to have maybe 1 or 2 weaknesses in comparison, or perhaps directly to the S tier tomes, or maybe they're held down because there's 1 or 2 spells that are banned. Generally when it comes to PvP, there are a couple of spells that are banned, and we're going to see one of them here and talk about it at a little bit of length, just so that way you understand exactly how powerful it is. The B tier tomes are going to be those that are still playable, but do have some very particular use conditions. These require some inflexibility when it comes to the build and the way they play out. Maybe they have some serious problems in regards to the higher tier tomes, but can perform very well in combat as long as you know how to use them. It's not that the B tiers are necessarily bad, but they are necessarily skill tests. If you bring a B tier tome and you don't know what's up, you're probably not going to do very well. The C tier tomes, I would say, are those that you generally want to avoid unless you have a very particular knowledge case where you need to use these, because you know that they're going to counter something that your opponent is using. And the D tier tomes, just don't bring these. There aren't going to be a lot of them when it comes to the high tier tomes, just because they are all very powerful, but ultimately, you're not going to be researching every single tier 4 tome, and so having a little granularity and highlighting which tomes really are the weakest, I think, is going to be helpful here. Now that said, let's start with our first tome, the Tome of Astral Convergence. So Tome of the Astral Convergence, unfortunately, has a lot of problems. I think the biggest problem is that there really isn't anything that I'm excited to be talking about. We do have a hero skill here that is very good. +1 strengthened, +1 defense, +1 resistance is very good on whenever a spell is cast, but it requires 6 battle magic skills, and you're really not going to have more than 1 or 2 dedicated battle mages, and 6 is a huge requirement when you definitely have to pick up killing momentum on as many of your heroes as possible, and then generally you want to pick up spur to action on as many of them as possible as well. So then, you just aren't very flexible when it comes to applying Arcane Surge, and unfortunately the rest of the tome just isn't very good either. There's no SPI, but this is a tier 4 tome, so SPIs are just going to be ludicrously expensive whenever it comes to their production cost, and generally speaking the game is heading towards the end at this point, so don't worry too much about SPIs. But these spells just aren't good. Cascading Power basically casts one version of an untargetable, very slow chain lightning over the course of a battle. It is a sustained world spell, and therefore, you can cast that chain lightning for free, air quotes around free, but it deals 5 damage on the first turn. If you overchannel on the second turn, it deals 15, then 20, then 25, and then if it's a really long fight, you might get 30 and 35, but that's not a ridiculous amount of damage that you're getting out of a spell. And of course, you're not able to target any of this, which means that you can't use the real power of a lightning damage effect, which is being able to target gold golems and things that are weak to lightning. You're just gonna have to cross your fingers in hopes that this targets something useful. And then because it's dealing that damage over a long period of time, if your opponent is careful and actually has any sort of support abilities that heal, they'll negate Cascading Power pretty easily. Astral Shattering is alright if you use it really intentionally on yourself. So you declare war on a free city, you use Astral Shattering on the free city to create a bunch of armies for your heroes to kill, therefore gain experience points and get stronger. But if you're using this on your actual opponent in PvP, it's mostly bad for you, because this is basically minus 50 gold, because they do have to, repair the province improvement, but then they just get a gigantic amount of experience points for fighting this army. So don't cast this unless you're very careful about how you use it. Explosive manifestation just doesn't work. This thing summons either an Astral Keeper or an Astral Serpent. Imagine casting a spell that summons an Astral Keeper surrounded by enemy units on a tier 4 spell. This is a nonsense spell, and unfortunately just doesn't do a lot. Astral Attunement is a heartbreak, because this is a major race transformation. These should be very, very powerful, but unfortunately it doesn't give the ethereal tag, which would be very, very strong. Like, if this thing operated sort of the way that some of the other major race transformations operate and like actually changed the nature of your race, then it would be pretty good, because ethereal gives you a lot of immunities, lots of really cool resistances, but overall, like, just pass through and +1 mana and +1 knowledge per population this is a minor race transformation pretending to be a major race transformation right now. And because you can only have one major race transformation, this is not good. This is actively bad. If this was like 3 or 5 mana per population, then this would probably be a lot better. But I would start it off with just adding the ethereal tag and see how it plays from there. But as it stands, this is not a good thing to be researching, unfortunately. And Arcane Maelstrom, although this is cute over the course of a very, very long battle, this can accumulate a lot of damage in a siege. You know what also does this kind of damage is just harass defenders or dragon attack, and then you get all of the damage up front and you don't have to wait for it, and that can put the defender on a really, really bad position on the back foot, right? If you deal 15 damage to all of their units immediately and they have 18 units, that's a lot more damage in terms of real effect on combat than Arcane Maelstrom is ever going to contribute. So unfortunately for the Tome of Astral Convergence, there really isn't anything here that I'm excited to be talking about. It just doesn't function very well. So that is going to begin our tier 4s with a D tier tome. We'll see if anybody can do a little better here. All right, so we are up to our regularly scheduled nonsense with Chaos with the Tome of Chaos Channeling. Tome of Chaos Channeling gives you a really strong minor race transformation and basically nothing else. Now, of course, race transformations I think are generally a little worse than enchantments, because these are not going to be applying to your Living Fog and the like, but this will help out your heroes a lot. And 4 fire resistance, Vengeful Flames, Fiery Wake, immunity to burning is just a great combination of things, and it does actually make an impact on the combat effectiveness of your heroes. But like, absolutely everything else here is garbage. You have Chaotic Rebuke, which is another battle magic skill that requires 6 pips in order to pick up, but unlike the one in Astral Convergence, which is actually very strong and you would love to be able to getting that on your killing momentum heroes, this just doesn't do anything. Like, 2 hexes, 60% chance of getting a random status effect is a nonsense ability and largely skippable. You have an enchantment that mostly doesn't do anything. If this healed for a lot more, it could be useful in the new patch, because it sounds like battle mage units are going to get better, and battle mage units do use strengthened a little better than support units, but like, this just doesn't heal a lot. And although it is a unit enchantment and therefore it doesn't really hurt you, it's also just like not the sort of thing you should be excited about. And Golden Horde is terrible. Don't ever cast this spell. A bunch of tier 1 units on a tier 4 tome is just very embarrassing. Not the sort of thing you want to be doing in Age of Wonders 4. You have Fan the Inferno, which is probably going to be a lot stronger once damage over time effects stack and actually do a reasonable amount of damage. But at the moment, Fan the Inferno is like almost a buff to your opponents, because you know how in like PvP in Pokemon, you can take a Toxic Orb and that prevents you from being paralyzed? It's the same way here, because Fan the Inferno is going to inflict burning on all of your opponent's units, and then they're not going to be able to be frozen, which is a much, much, much scarier status effect the way it works right now. So this is like mostly not a good spell. And then you have a Sustained City spell that's going to add Gremlins on the defense. I mean, that's okay, I guess, because having a bunch of extra Gremlins isn't like a bad thing, but it's also not exciting because these things are flimsy as heck. So unfortunately for the Tome of Chaos Channeling, this is very much a single spell tome, and specifically it's a minor race transformation, which means that this is really only slightly powering up your heroes and doing basically nothing else. I think this is a D tier tome, and despite the fact that we do have a better race transformation than the Tome of Astral Convergence, I think that the Tome of Astral Convergence hero skill is ultimately strong enough that it does edge Chaos Channeling out out for one of the worst tomes here in tier 4s. Alright, Order Mages, if you have survived until this point and you have the 6 Order affinity to pick up Tome of Exaltation, you are about to get paid off in a huge way. Tome of Exaltation, what do we get here? So first we get an SPI that might get you a little bit of Imperium. Depending on how many of these free cities that are level 3, this could get you, 6, 9, 12 Imperium. It's not a huge deal, but anything that gets you a little bit of free Imperium is always nice. And then of course you have access to Exalted Brilliance, which is a warfare hero skill and therefore a little bit stronger than those battle magic skills we kind of poo-pooed, because this is a 90% chance of blinding people that are adjacent. Now of course blind is generally a lot stronger against ranged and battle mage units, so this isn't as good right now, but it does sound like ranged units are going to get a lot better in the new patch, because the mobility is going to get worse, which means that, the natural counters for ranged are going to go away, which could make this even more useful. But the real power of Tome of Exaltation is in its spellbook. Like, the only thing here that you really should not be excited about is Temple of the Exalted. This costs 1300 production for some reason, so like literally never research this unless it's just a cheap thing to keep churning through your tomes, and definitely never build this. But all the rest of this stuff is bananas. You get Resurrect Unit, which is just like an upgraded version of Salvation pretty much, because this is just going to bring a unit back to life at full temporary hit points. Really, really big deal. But you also get a major race transformation, and unlike the Astral major race transformation, this is a real major race transformation. You get Faithful on all of your racial units, including all your racial heroes. Now, you may have already picked up Keeper's Mark as a way to get Faithful, but keep in mind that Keeper's Mark is going to apply to all of your non-racial units, and that is a very big deal when it comes to Age of Wonders 4. This is more for your heroes than anything else, but hey, if you've got some racial units sitting around that need Faithful, then you got it here. But I think more importantly is you get access to Flying and Celestial. Flying is just fantastic when it comes to combat. Being able to move your units around without collision is a really, really, really big deal whenever you're trying to just murderize people with your killing machine guys that you've built. And then Celestial is also just a fantastic way to protect those killing machine heroes that you've built, because control loss immunity means you're immune to insanity, you're immune to berserk, to mind control effects. This is a very, very, very powerful tag. The problem, of course, is you do have a frost weakness. You have a blight weakness too, but like blight damage generally isn't very good in the game right now, so less of a big deal. But frost damage is something that you should be aware of that can be pretty scary, because the Tome of Cryomancy and the Tome of the Cold Dark are both just insanely powerful things. But that's okay, because Angel Eyes, even with those weaknesses, is still just a fantastic race transformation because of Shrine of Smiting. So this is probably the single best tier 5 mythic unit in the game if you support it correctly. Like, in a vacuum, I think gold golems are probably stronger, but these are not that hard to build around. And once you start building around them, Shrines of Smiting are just like almost more powerful than the heroes that you've built with all of their killing momentum, because you can get killing momentum on this pretty quickly. So how are you going to use killing momentum on Shrine of Smiting? You have a single target attack that only does 30 damage, Walker. Like, this is terrible. Oh wait, let's read the tooltip. Nope. Smiting Prayer. For each friendly faithful unit in battle, including your heroes that you've transformed with Angel Eyes or anyone you've got the Keeper's Mark on, you get plus 4 damage for each of these units that you have with you. So it's really, really easy to get your Shrines of Smiting up to like 100 damage per Smiting Prayer Blast. So that means that, these guys can go around to like one-hit killing stuff, and then you're like, oh, that's not even that big a deal. One-hit kills, whatever. You get access to killing momentum at legend rank. So if you can kill something with a Shrine of Smiting, then you can turn around and kill something else with a Shrine of Smiting. 2 units per turn per Shrine of Smiting. That's achievable. And then you're like, all right, well, that sounds better than it really should be, because 12 experience points as a soldier means you're gonna need a bazillion experience points to get to legend rank. Well, you would, except you also get Ascended Warriors. Non-hero units in target army gain 1 rank. So the combination of these things means that it is very, very trivial to get a whole lot of Shrines of Smiting with access to killing momentum, and therefore the ability to just like blitz through the enemy army ASAP using Ascended Warriors. And then, if things are going badly in the battle and you need to use Divine Vengeance to hit a bunch of AoE stuff, a 2 hex radius, 28 damage smite effect is a really, really strong thing. I think overall the Tome of Exaltation is just a fantastic tome. Don't ever do this. This is very bad. That's only really weighed down by one thing. It is in the order tomes. So we're going to drop this in the S rank, but don't be surprised if we put a couple of things in front of it, because you do have to do a lot of homework in order to get to Tome of Exaltation and then stay alive, and generally that homework means being a little weaker in the early game. But if you make it to the late game with this tome, you're going to run over people most of the time, I promise. promise. Alright, so up next we have the Tome of Nature's Wrath. Now this one's going to be kind of difficult to evaluate because this would be like an easy S+++ tier if Awaken Instincts was unbanned, but the way that PvP generally works is there are a couple of spells that are usually banned, and this is one of them because this is a ludicrous spell. This is a very dumb spell. So Awaken Instincts, what does it do? All your units heal 15 temporary hit points, regain all action points, and become berserk for 2 turns. So normally what this is supposed to be doing is you get a whole free turn for casting it, but then that free turn is relatively inefficient because your units are berserk, and then you're berserk the turn after that. And so that's supposed to be balanced, but the problem is that we just talked about this in Tome of Exaltation. Angel Eyes gives you control loss immunity. There's also control loss immunity on just like some ridiculous units naturally, like Shrine of Smiting just has this always. You can also pick up the level 12 order affinity for your dragon, and then you have control loss immunity there. And then what this means is that you're not even getting the berserk downside, you're just getting action points. And getting, 18 free turns for casting a spell is dumb. This is very dumb. I think if this was all your non-hero units that were only animals and plants, this would probably be more balanced, but the way that it works right now is it really does need to be banned in PvP and needs to be reworked generally, because this is such a stupid spell. But if you and your friends want to play around with it and just, see how ridiculously overpowered it is, then please feel free to. It is ridiculously overpowered. But you know what? Even without Awaken Instincts, I think the Tome of Nature's Wrath is still pretty good. You get access to Devolve, which is functionally an auto kill spell. It's an auto kill spell with only a 90% chance, which means that it does trigger off of status resistance. But if you do your homework and you get the Tome of Cryomancy or the Tome of the Great Cold or whatever the Shadow 3 is, then you can definitely shred people's status resistance to the point where this is an auto success. And if you manage to turn your opponent's Shrine of Smiting into a Gore-Tusk Piglet, that really is a gigantic upgrade for you in terms of combat efficiency. And unlike just auto killing it, if you turn it into a tier 1 animal, then they can't even resurrect it. So this is like even better than an auto kill in some ways. And if resisted, it inflicts stunned instead. Like the only downside of course is that it is a non-hero enemy, but that's okay. Like unless you're letting people bring 9 heroes to a fight, there are gonna be some very powerful units on the board, and this takes care of them very, very easily. You get access to Nature's Avenger, which is a ridiculous support skill. All friendly animals and plants within 2 hexes become 5 strengthened. You can only use this once per battle, but that's okay. You just like move your units around at the very beginning of the game in the first turn, use Nature's Avenger to give 5 strengthened to everybody, then move them out and just slaughter, because this is a 50% damage increase. This is really, really sick. And then of course you also get access to like one of the best plants in the game to get 50% extra damage on. You get access to the Horned God. So what does the Horned God do for us? So first of course is that it is a summon, therefore it's just a lot easier to get onto the board. Generally speaking, if you can summon a high tier unit, that's a lot easier than building it with draft, because you're just going to have enough casting points to churn these guys out. But the Horned God has a lot of really, really good tags here. We're a magic origin unit, which means any of the magic origin buffs are going to be active here. It's a plant, which means it is going to be applicable for the Nature's Wrath perk. You also have Fey, which gives you a little bit of extra spirit resistance, so you have some nice typing. You're weak to fire, but like that's not the end of the world for the Horned God, because you got Shepherd of the Wild. Friendly animals and plants are fearless, therefore you don't have to be worried about morale collapsing as long as you have a Horned God alive on the field. You have access to Reclaiming Bolt, which is a gigantic amount of damage to be boosting by 50%. It's blight damage, but still, like, this is a lot of damage. And then the Reclaim ability is also pretty nice. Being able to heal adjacent allied units for 15 while also smashing face is a really good thing. Good access to Wild Eruption, which is summoning living vines onto adjacent hexes around your targets. Corralling your enemy units is a big deal. Animate Flora is generally not something I'm a big fan of when it comes to like actually using a tactical spell for this, but you can do this multiple times in one combat with a Horned God. You just summon one like on the first turn and then another one on the fourth turn or whatever, and you're getting great value there. So these are just fantastic units across the board. They're a little squishy because they aren't like melee mages or anything like that, so you do not count these as a frontline unit and don't bring like 15 of them to one fight and expect to do well. But these are just outrageous support units and do play very well with stuff like Tome of Vigor. Horned God plus Phoenixes just run people over if they're not prepared. We do do have some like mediocre spells. Destructive Regrowth is sort of there in case you didn't pick up a strategic layer damage spell, and then Awaken Forest is there for just like the memes. But you know, this and this alone are fantastic, and even without the Awaken Instincts, I think you shouldn't be ashamed to bring Tomes of Nature's Wrath. I think this is very easy S++ tier if Awakened Instincts is not banned, but it needs to be reworked. Hopefully it is soon. So for the meantime, we're going to slot this in as an A tier tome, and just be aware that this can be even stronger if Awakened Instincts ever becomes unbannable. Alright, so up next we have one of my personal favorites, the Tome of Oblivion. Now the Tome of Oblivion is a little difficult to evaluate on the surface if you don't look under the hood and actually read the spells in question, because you see here, this is a shadow tome that doesn't interact with the undead, at least not nominally, doesn't interact with cold, again, at least not nominally, and doesn't interact with morale. And so on the surface, you're like, all right, there's no synergies here. Why on earth would I be taking this tier 4 tome that has no synergies with all of my shadow stuff? Well, it's because there are synergies, they're just hidden. So first we get a hero skill, Mind Crush. Base magic attacks have a 30% chance of inflicting insanity. Now, generally, a 30% chance of inflicting anything is basically a 0% chance of inflicting anything, but be aware that this is a battle magic skill, therefore there are some things that allow that hero to actually utilize status resistance a little better. Magecraft lets them ignore a little bit of it, for instance, but critically you also have access to Flash Freeze. Flash Freeze is one of Tome of Oblivion's best friends when it comes to the way the game plays out. -5 status resistance when you're dealing with an insanity effect is an incredible upgrade to the strength of this tome. Now, of course, this is going to struggle against anyone who has control loss resistance or control loss immunity, but against anyone who doesn't, if you can get this up to a 50 or a 60% chance of inflicting insanity, and then you have it on a base magic attack that can fire 3 times, your hero can usually pretty reliably make people insane using Mind Crush, which is a fantastic stun, because it's not even just a stun, it actually makes the unit uncontrollable and will attack random units, and so you can use your hero to make another hero insane, and then that hero turns around and slaughters their own allies if you're lucky. But you know, that's not really the power of the tome, it's these 3 spells up here. Now don't research this, these skills are there in case you need something that is inexpensive and you want to just churn through tomes, especially Fog of Insanity, but Devouring Void is just a garbage spell and it's expert skill for some reason, so do not ever research this. But Sleep of Oblivion is really good, Ritual of Somnia is pretty good, very powerful early on and then slows down, and then Living Fog is just like one of the best units in the game. So Sleep of Oblivion, what do we get? We get target non-hero unit dies. After 2 turns, they come back to life with 75% of their total hit points and are inflicted with insanity. So naturally you'd be like, all right, this is a Sleep of Oblivion, but it literally kills the unit in question. I think right now that I'm of the opinion that because this is a tier 4 spell and a lot of them are just bonkers powerful, that this isn't inherently a broken interaction. But the way this really works in combat is that you auto kill a unit with the Sleep of Oblivion, and then you just turn around and eat the corpse with something. Like either you use Raise Dead and turn it into a decaying zombie, or you just eat it with Ritual Cannibals, or you eat it with Dark Ritual or whatever, and then it turns from after 2 turns they come back to life to target non-hero unit dies, period, no more text. If you're waiting for it to come back to life, then this spell is probably a little worse, but the fact of the matter is that you can still stand on top of them and then prevent them from coming back, so it's mostly still just target non-hero unit dies, period. The question, of course, is like, is that the most broken spell in tier 4? Not really, but it's one of the best ones in tier 4 and a great reason to pick up the Tome of Oblivion. You also get access to a pretty powerful strategic layer spell in Ritual of Somnia. Now, in most PvP groups, they're making it so that you can't cast more than 1 strategic spell per army, because otherwise you don't even really fight in PvP, you just cast strategic spells until somebody dies. But, you know, even without the ability to stack this with Flash Freeze, this is still a very powerful spell, especially if you're doing this early on. You get this while people still don't have like 14 status resistance on everybody, and this is pretty easily just like stun half of your opponent's army for half of the battle. That's a pretty nice ability when it comes down to it, and it has some really goofy interactions when it comes to interacting with Dark Ritual and resurrection effects. Overall, this is like probably probably the medium part of the Tome of Oblivion though, because I think the best part here is the Living Fog itself. So why do I love Living Fog, and why didn't I research it in our PvP game? Well, I didn't research it in the PvP game because I just wanted to have fun, but this is a fantastic unit. We have a tier 4 fighter unit. Now generally fighter units are not particularly good, but this does mean that unlike a lot of the other things we're going to see here in the tier 4 tomes, this is not a mythic unit. That is critical for the utilization of the Living Fog itself, because the best way to use this is just stack it with a ton of unit enchantments and go to town. So what does the Living Fog do? First, we have an ethereal unit. Ethereal units are very powerful because this means you're immune to a gigantic slew of status effects, including frozen, so it's very hard to pin Living Fog down using spells and the like. And of course you get access to pass through, but you also get access to spirit resistance, which I think is pretty neat, because generally a lot of the things in the Shadow Tomes are going to be weak to spirit units, therefore it's going to be easy for people to run over you with high. But if you have Living Fog, you know, a little bit of spirit resistance can go a long way to threatening your opponent. It's also a magic origin unit, which means if you took the Tome of Summoning for some reason, then you have a fantastic unit here to target with the Arcane Overcharge. But generally speaking, you don't even really have to do that with Living Fog because of Mind Strike itself. So Mind Strike, what do we have? First, we have a 60% chance of inflicting insanity. Obviously, this is a lot better if you flash frozen your opponent, but the real highlight for Mind Strike is the unblockable damage. Damage cannot be reduced by defense or resistance. So what this means is that if you take Living Fog and Tome of Oblivion, then you just take a whole bunch of unit enchantments, and then Living Fogs can kill basically any unit in one turn. They just attack over and over and over again because they have 3 hits here. And then if you give them a whole bunch of unit enchantments and therefore a bunch of extra damage types, guess what? They're just gonna mulch through things, because there's nothing, like if you have a Bastion with 18 defense and 16 resistance, Living Fog just laughs at that and says, alright, how many hit points do you have? Let's go to town, kid. And that's the way Living Fog really works. It's also fierce, so it can't rout, so it's sort of like an undead on that sense, but it's like even better because it's only 50% less morale lost from all sources, but can gain morale and therefore crit a whole lot. This is an outrageously powerful unit. I think this is probably one of the best tier 4 units in the entire game, and a very, very, very good reason to be playing around with this tome. So Tome of Oblivion, this is just an amazing Shadow Tome here. I think generally speaking, if you're not sure where to go, then if you're picking up a bunch of Shadow stuff, because there's really powerful Shadow stuff early on, take Tome of Oblivion, rock it, and have a whole lot of fun with it. This is an easy S tier for me. Alright, so up next we have a victim of circumstance and meta, the Tome of Paradise. So the Tome of Paradise, what's wrong with this tome? First, what's wrong with this tome is that we have a couple of things here, the Blessing of Paradise, the Garden of Bliss, and the Inspiring Icon ability, all that add a bunch of city stability. The problem is that getting into the positive city stability is like mostly worthless. The Blessing of Paradise does double the income bonus for being in positive, but it still doesn't even make it good. So you can see down here in the negative city stability that you're at minus 10% and minus 20% on all city income. That applies to knowledge, gold, mana, you know, the important resources once you've gotten a city up and going. But the stuff that you get from positive city stability is only particularly useful when the city is in its growth phase, and because it's a percentage based bonus on these numbers, that means it's not even particularly good, because like you're not going to get gigantic amounts of production on a size 3 city out of positive stability. You're going to get it on a size 15 city, sure, but by then like the food just doesn't matter that much, and hopefully you've built enough stuff that the production doesn't matter that much either. So stability is just like mostly a nonsense ability in the game right now. I think if it was the opposite of being unstable and was just a flat bonus to all resources at 10% or above, then we could see Tome of Paradise become a lot better, because then Blessing of Paradise would be really sweet. But like the way it works right now, this is mostly nonsense. This is mostly nonsense, although the ability to convert some food into mana is alright, but this costs 750 production on a farm, so like you're mostly not going to build this. And Inspiring Icon is mostly just plus 20% crit chance on the hero in question, which is alright, but like not amazing. And then you have a lot of spells here that just don't do anything. Like this spell mostly doesn't do anything. This spell mostly doesn't do anything. This spell unfortunately mostly doesn't do anything because it only terraforms at 1 province per turn, whereas the terraforming in Shadow in the Tome of the Cold Dark actually terraforms at 2 provinces per turn. So that means like all things aside, the nature transformation here in Paradise is going to die to the transformation available in Shadow, which not only transforms faster, but also comes online faster because it's on a tier 3 rather than a tier 4. So like really the only thing you have here in the Tome of Paradise is the Exhilarating Pollen, which is okay, right? 90% chance to distract all enemy units is actually pretty useful. And then the plus 15 morale on all friendly units can also keep you alive in a rough battle. And then critically, you also get access to the major race transformation available to nature players. And Gaia's Chosen on its own is not particularly great, but is fantastic with the tier 5 nature tome. So what this means is that, like Tome of Paradise, I don't think you're mostly going to be taking this as your first nature tome. I think really what you want to do if you want to unlock the Tome of Goddess of Nature is take Tome of Nature's Wrath and then like a different kind of affinity, pick this up, and then come back and pick up the Tome of Paradise. But Tome of Paradise with Gaia's Chosen and Tome of Goddess of Nature is actually very strong, because Gaia's Chosen gives you plus 3 status resistance. Status resistance is very rare in the game right now, and plus 3 is a reasonable amount. Plus 20 hit points is also a really big deal to get on all of your heroes, or, you know, most of your heroes. But you critically get access to the plant tag, which means, of course, that if you're playing around with the Tome of Nature's Wrath and Nature's Avengers, then all of a sudden all of your heroes can pick up the 5 strengthened on just one person using Nature's Avenger. Like, this is a fantastic transformation that does need a lot of support to really get there, and unfortunately it's on a tome that's mostly nonsense, and that does have to be reflected in the grade. Now that we've like talked it through and like the actual use applications of it, this is, I think, a C tier tome. I think it's one of those tomes that you're only going to pick up in a very particular build, and I do think generally you're going to take this after your tier 5, but I think in a very narrow build it can be incredibly strong. 5 strengthened on all your heroes is just a great thing to do if you pick up Nature's Wrath, and this lets you do that. Alright, so up next we have the Tome of Supremacy. Now the Tome of Supremacy isn't quite as strong as the Tome of Exaltation, but it does have some really interesting things going on and some really great use cases. So what do we get out of the Tome of Supremacy? First, we get Condemn Army. Condemn Army is one of these other really powerful strategic layer spells like the Blizzard or the Flash Freeze effect in Shadow, but this one, unlike those others, becomes condemned for 5 world map turns. This means that if you cast this on an enemy and then you don't engage them immediately, it's not the end of the world. Condemned is a very powerful effect to have applied to an enemy army. -3 status resistance is no joke, but of course you're also dealing spirit damage, and spirit damage, generally speaking, is one of the best damage types that you're going to get available in the game. It just exploits a lot of weaknesses, and there's very few things that resist it. You also get access to Supreme Magic. Supreme Magic is fairly narrow. This is sort of like the Tome of Devastation and Flame Burst weapons, but whereas Flame Burst weapons applies to melee stuff, which in the current build is generally a little stronger than Battle Mage things, and also critically gives you a crit chance, this is going to be giving Zeal to your Battle Mage and support units who have been missing out on it up until now. So this means that if Battle Mages are oppressive in the new patch, Tome of Supremacy is going to get a lot better. But also, this is Exploding Corpses, so this is mostly going to be great against Necromancers and then so-so against everybody else. But against a Necromancer, Supreme Magic is extremely messed up. 20 extra spirit damage on an explosion and critically removing that corpse, so therefore the Necromancer can't use it for stuff, is a very powerful effect. And then, you know, if you need it on your heroes, you can pick it up here. Not sure if you're gonna need it, because ultimately it's one of those things that Battle Magic heroes aren't probably going to be specializing in. Rather, you're going to use your support heroes and your Battle Magic units to finish things off, but it's there in the choice that you need it. You're probably not building Monument of Supremacy. This thing just costs way too much in terms of its production and doesn't return a whole lot to you, but Anthem of Victory can be pretty good. Plus 15 morale and 3 strengthened on all allied units means that even if you haven't done anything else to try to keep your morale up until this point, that this spell alone can keep you alive over a long and grueling battle by keeping your units from running away. But on that same note, we also have the Eagle Rider. So the Eagle Rider itself, this is not like a game-breaking unit the same way that the Shrine of Smiting is, and that is going to be reflected in our grade. But the Eagle Rider itself is pretty solid. It's a 32 movement, which is, I think, the biggest problem on the Eagle Rider, but it is a flying unit, which is really nice, because that's going to give them the option to just position themselves kind of wherever they need to go. But you're also just going to get a ton of extra morale here. You have Embolden Allies, which in a 2 hex radius, all friendly units are going to get Rally and 2 strengthened. Very powerful sort of support effect that you're getting here. You're also getting Inspiring Killer, so if you need a bunch of extra morale, having an Eagle Rider finish somebody off is a really big deal. But you're also getting Inspiring Presence. All other friendly units gain morale 25% faster. That means if you take Eagle Riders and Tome of Revelry, it's pretty easy for you to get to basically infinity morale ASAP. The problem, of course, is that you don't really get anything else from getting up to like 80 morale. Like at a certain point, 20 is definitely enough. enough. You just need enough morale that you can suffer some losses and not dip below 20 in order for you to keep going, which is like one of the biggest dings against Eagle Riders right now. I think the other big ding against them, of course, is that their melee strike just kind of like doesn't do anything other than raw damage, but it does a reasonable amount of raw damage. 10 strike is spirit damage, and then 8 is physical on a repeat. Can really dish it out if you give them a couple of unit enchantments. And then of course you got some nice little survivability tools here in shield defense and the like. So how are we going to evaluate this tome here, the Tome of Supremacy? We have some things that are like mostly situational against one enemy. We have a fairly powerful strategic spell. We have a fairly powerful tactical spell. We have a mostly skippable city structure, and then a unit that I don't think you can really spam, but having a couple of these in an army can be pretty good. I think all of that together kind of sounds like a B tier to me. This is not an unplayable thing, and obviously if your opponent is playing against that you're playing against is undead, this is a little better, and if they're not, this is a little worse. But I think overall you can definitely do worse than taking the Tome of Supremacy, and it's nice to see some pretty powerful order tomes here considering the amount of garbage you've had to wade through up until this point. Alright, so up next we have the Tome of the Astral Mirror. Now this is a really interesting tome because it's very front loaded. We have an incredibly powerful spell here in Summon Astral Reflections, but there are some niche cases and good uses for most of the other spells here, and that will of course be reflected in the grade that we end up taking for the Tome of the Astral Mirror. But in terms of like a single spell tome, this is one of the best spells that you can have as the only spell in your tome. Summon Astral Reflections is going to create 2 Astral Reflections of target friendly unit into unoccupied adjacent hexes. So what you're going to use this on is something like a transmuter, somebody who has a disruption or a debuff or a buff effect, and then you get to do that 2 more times. And of course, getting a whole bunch of extra units onto the board is actually a really big deal. They can't summon other units, so like this is a very narrow in terms of what you can apply this to, but if you apply this to Living Fog, that can be really strong. You apply this to a bunch of Tyrant Knights and have them just use their demoralizing charge, that's really strong. So there are a lot of great applications for Summon Astral Reflections, and this is just a fantastic spell overall when it comes to the use of this tome. But there are some other things here. We get the Summon Mirror Mimic. Now generally I don't like Mirror Mimics overall, but if you are one of the persons who's actually last to your tier 4 tomes, then getting this is a fantastic way to keep up with the people who got there earlier, because using a Mirror Mimic is generally cheaper than whatever else they've built, and it's practically the same thing. Like you're just copying another very powerful non-hero unit, copying all of the enchantments that they've stacked up and going to town with that really cool unit that you get on the cheap. You also have some really cool utility spells here. Generally Mirror Veil isn't great just because you're not going to have a whole lot of shield and polearm units, but there are some pretty interesting niche cases for it. And of course you get the mirror magic deflection on your heroes themselves. I think this is meaningfully more powerful than Mirror Veil. I think if Mirror Veil were available for more types of units, then obviously it would be like a lot stronger. Having a Mirror Veil on your Living Fog would be really sick. Give me a fighter right here to keep my dragons alive. But you know, if you only get it on your heroes, that's not even that bad. Reflecting 50% of non-physical damage sustained back onto attackers if you're getting blasted with like a Shrine of Smiting, for instance, is a great way to turn your opponent's strengths against them. Another way that you can kind of get good value out of the Tome of Astral Mirror is the Throne of Mirrors itself. Generally, I'm not a huge fan of these sorts of like city structures that don't really do anything for you in the event that, except in the event that you're being besieged. But overall, this is actually a really good one because it's really inexpensive to build. There's not a whole lot of production cost here. The upkeep is meaningful. 15 mana isn't free, but getting a free Astral Reflection of your ruler and 40 defense on the fortification is a huge upgrade if you have to fight in a siege. And of course, because it's an adept skill city structure, it's going to be really inexpensive to research. The only part of the tome that like I think overall is just not that good is the Astral Revelation, and of course because the Summon Mirror Mimic is generally not as good in the event that you've kept pace with people, that will be reflected in the overall grade. But this is a fantastic spell. This is a sometimes useful spell. This is a usually pretty useful hero skill. I think overall the package that you get out of the Tome of the Astral Mirror is pretty good. I think that there's just nothing that's like outrageously outrageously good, so I think this is probably going to be an A tier tome, somewhere around Nature's Wrath. Just be aware that like the biggest thing you're getting here is Astral Reflections by a pretty meaningful margin. Alright, so up next we have the first of our Materium tomes, the Tome of the Crucible. Now the Tome of the Crucible is sort of like the Tome of Astral Reflection, where we kind of have one spell that's head and shoulders a lot stronger than the rest, but I think the use cases for some of the other spells here are a little less niche than the use cases in the Astral Reflection, and I do think that overall, because one of the strongest things in the Astral is generally banned, Disruption Wave is almost always banned in PvP, that Materium Affinity is going to help bring the Tome of the Crucible up. But the real headliner for the Tome of the Crucible is Lava Burst. Lava Burst is a ridiculous spell. So what do we get? We get all units in a 2-hex radius take 30 damage, are inflicted with burning, are slowed, and the ground is set on fire. Now, the reason that this is absurd is that this is not percentage based, which means it is ignoring status resistance. It's only status immunity that is going to be helping you out here. Being immune to burning, for instance, could be pretty useful if you're fighting against Lava Burst, and a potential reason to be interested in some of the Chaos Tomes. But overall, burning just isn't that dangerous in the current meta. We'll see once dots are upgraded, because these are supposed to start stacking and supposed to start ignoring regular resistance and just looking at elemental resistance. But at the moment, the burning is like a nice little addition. The real strength here, of course, is that you do have slowed automatically. Slowed is a fantastic debuff to be applying to a bunch of your enemy's units. And of course, this is not just, making them weaker because you can get in there and rumble and ignore retaliation attacks, but this is also countering hastened, which is a very dangerous thing on your opponent's army if you're not prepared to deal with it. All in all, Lava Burst is just a fantastic package. There is something that Morgie pointed out about one of our other Chaos Tomes that I think is very important here, the Tome of Pandemonium and Vessels of Chaos. 10% damage for each of the negative status effects stacks up to 3 times, means that if you pick up the Tome of the Crucible here and cast Lava Burst, anything that you attack with any of your racial units or your racial heroes are also getting a 20% bonus in regards to Lava Burst. Even without that interaction, Lava Burst is still just an incredibly powerful spell capable of rumbling with the stuff that you get in tier 5s, but with that interaction in particular, it is even stronger. And of course, there's other great stuff here in the tome. You get meteor arrows. Now, generally in the current meta, you're not going to have a ton of ranged units, but you might have a whole lot of snow spirits running around. Snow spirits are just great units that you can pick up on a fantastic tome early, evolve them, get them high experience points, and then you can use them for a pretty reasonable amount of time. And then meteor arrows really rock and roll on those snow spirits or skirmisher units that you have rocking around, because +4 damage to the target and adjacent units means that you can just like AoE people on your skirmishers. Like, you always want to have the way to threaten AoE to force your opponent to break up their formation, and this lets you do it without even committing any sort of tactical spell to it. You just have to have a couple of skirmishers, and then you can rock and roll all over any sort of tight formation that they present to you. And even if they aren't, +4 fire damage always on your ranged attacks, that's a pretty meaningful upgrade considering a lot of the other ones were basically like +1 or +2 damage overall. And then of course you also get that effect on your heroes. Like, this is a warfare skill that you unlock with only 4 points, and then you get +3 fire damage to the target and all adjacent units on melee and physical ranged attacks. Meteor Strikes is super messed up and a great way to get good value out of your killing momentum murder machines. And then you also get an SPI. This one you're probably not going to build except in extreme duress, because you like desperately need gold and you're playing on a gigantic map, but we're doing that right now, and I am desperately building Great Foundries just to get a little bit of extra gold to keep my army gigantic and growing. And then you get a nice little adept skill that's very easy to research because it's not very expensive. This isn't a spell, so it doesn't scale up in terms of research skills the same way, so that means you can use this to chew through tomes a little bit faster. And 40 fortification health on something that doesn't cost 1 million production is actually a pretty nice thing, same as it was with Astral Reflections. You also get a terraforming spell that deals 20 damage to all armies in a province. That's a really big deal if you don't have access to that effect otherwise. Like, the only spell that's like really entirely skippable here is Meteor Shower. This is 2 meteors impact next to a random enemy when you cast this, as well as the start of your turn, dealing 15 fire damage and physical damage in a 1-hex radius. Generally speaking, you're better off just casting Lava Burst. Like, the fact that these are on the same tome is kind of unfortunate, because this isn't even like a terrible effect. The only downside is that it is entirely random and does not give you any sort of status effect, but this overall is also presenting a pretty reasonable amount of damage because of the 3 turns. Cast this thing first and then get some good value out of it. But like overall, the Tome of the Crucible just gives you tons and tons of value, great spells. There's no units here, and I do think that should be reflected in their overall grading here, but I think that this is an S tier tome. I think Tome of the Crucible performs incredibly well as long as you use it when it is strong. Alright, so up next we have the Tome of the Demon Gate. Now the Tome of the Demon Gate, as we discussed in the tier 3s, is really the big payoff in my opinion for taking Tome of Pandemonium. Picking up Chaos Eaters early in your tier 3 tomes and then picking up Tome of the Demon Gate as your first tier 4 means you get access to Fight for Power. Then you can take 2 Chaos Eaters, fight them together, and get a Balor. And Balors are really absurd. You get Chaos Brand, this is target unit sustains damage, becomes Berserk until the end of battle. If not a hero, it turns into a tier 1 fiend under your control upon its death. And of course it's dealing 35 fire damage. And then, you know, it's got some pretty sick objects here too. The Sunder the Earth ability is really nice. But the big downside for Balors is that A, they have Death Explosion, which means that if somebody casts the Sleep of Oblivion on it, guess what happens to the Balor? It goes pop and then it does not come back, even all on its own. And then the second problem, of course, is that Berserk does play pretty poorly against Tome of Exaltation and the ability for Order players to ignore that mind control effect. But if you're coming up against somebody who's rocking Balors and you do not have either Sleep of Oblivion or Tome of Exaltation, then they are gonna massacre you. And because this thing is available insanely early, that should be reflected in the overall power of this tome, because you can get a bunch of Balors really quickly with Tome of Pandemonium into Tome of the Demon Gate if you really want. Unfortunately for Tome of the Demon Gate, a lot of the other stuff isn't particularly good. This is of course a teleporter that you can build, but unlike the teleporter that's available on the Tome of Teleportation, this doesn't even really help you delay teleporters, because you can take Tome of Teleportation and build those chrono gates early and then only pick up the teleporters later, but like by the time you're on Tome of the Demon Gate, you've probably unlocked teleporters already, and these are crazy expensive to build in terms of their production. And although they do operate as a unit deployment location, the ability to build a bunch of fiend units is just not enough for me to be interested in building this. The demonic anthem ability is like mostly cute rather than anything else. When this unit is the army leader, friendly non-fiend and non-hero units transform into tier 1 fiends upon death in battle. That means that like you're gonna get really crappy units out of dead units, but generally speaking you probably want to be getting that out of Dark Ritual rather than out of Demonic Anthem. This is nice because at least it defends those corpses against enemies who are using Dark Ritual, which means that kind of also you don't have to use Dark Ritual yourself, but like overall not a fantastic pick. I think Demonic Summoning is there in case you didn't set yourself up with Pandemonium, but like you should do that. If you want to use Tome of the Demon Gate, definitely take Tome of Pandemonium. It's much stronger than trying to research this first, cast it a bunch of times to try to get the fiends that you need for Fight for Power. Not to mention the fact that this is very expensive when it comes to summoning spells. You also have Sacrificial Slaughter, which you're probably not going to use. Abyssal Flames, which is one of those terraforming spells that's available in case you didn't get one somewhere else, because you know this is a way for you to deal 20 fire damage to all enemies in a province. But you can get that on a lot of different tomes. Just be aware that it is here for you if you need it. And then you get the Demonkin Major Race Transformation, but I think the Demonkin Major Race Transformation is like only marginally better than the Astral Transformation. You get Flying, which is really good, and then you get Frenzy, which is alright. Like generally there are better ways to get a whole bunch of Strengthened, but having this there to help offset Decay and Strengthened is pretty cool. But then like the Demonkin ability just doesn't really do anything. Immune to Burning and Desolate Walk, like come on guys, give me like plus 20 hit points or like plus 5 melee damage or something like that. So Tome of the Demon Gate, what do we really get here? Well, what we really get here is an enormous payoff for a fairly narrow but very powerful tome if you're trying to set up for Tome of the Demon Gate, and mostly nothing else. So that sounds to me like a B tier tome. I don't think it's bad, it's just that it really is inflexible in the way that it operates, and it is very particularly weak to the extremely powerful tomes. If you accept that Tome of Exaltation and Tome of Oblivion are generally very good and people are going to be bringing them at a higher rate than the other ones, then the operating space here is a little more narrow, but if you're way ahead on knowledge and people are still struggling on their first tier 3 tome and you're Morky and it's like turn 31 and you're unlocking a tier 4, he's probably going to pick this one, because Balors, if they don't have a tier 4 on the other side, are basically just uncheckable and will annihilate armies all on their own. So up next we have the Tome of the Golden Realm. Now the Tome of the Golden Realm is a really interesting one. There are some like real misses and some real hits. We will talk about the Gold Golem last because I think that is the highlight for this. But there are some useful pieces to the Tome of the Golden Realm other than the Gold Golem themselves. We of course get Gold Touched. This is a minor race transformation, therefore you can have as many of those as you want. You can only have one major, but an infinite number of minor. And generally the race transformations aren't like a big deal, but +2 resistance on all of your racial heroes, and if you happen to have any bastions laying around, is actually a really big deal on the survivability front there, right? Like, you are gonna probably want to pick up at least resistance 1 on almost all of your heroes by the end of the game, preferably if you have the points and you haven't reset enough times, then you can get even more, but picking up 2 extra resistance points on all your heroes is a big increase to their survivability. And then, the gold per population in your cities is like a little bit of smattering of economy, not the biggest deal. Like, this part could literally not exist and this would still be a pretty good spell just because of the resistance. But then you also get Gilded Magic. Gilded Magic, of course, is a battle magic skill. We've talked a lot about why I don't like those, but this is something that is not a percent-based effect. This is just crits inflict gilded. So all you need to do to get great value out of Gilded Magic is do some crit stacking, find ways for your heroes to get extra critical hit chance. If you can get your battle mages up to 50% plus critical hit, and then you give them an orb that lets them fire multiple times, guess what's gonna happen? Like, they're probably gonna gild something. So if your battle mages are just able to stun, or your battle mage heroes are able to stun pretty reliably with their crits and gilding stuff, that makes them very, very powerful support units for the rest of your army. And this is a really nice pickup there. You also have an SPI that's going to get you a bazillion extra gold. Whether or not this matters kind of depends on the map setting that you're on. If it's a 4-player free-for-all, then this is basically a blank because it doesn't matter. But in the 7-player free-for-all that we found ourselves in with Winslaya and Zombie and Amygdara and the bunch, these guys are generating a lot of extra gold for us, and that's important because these are really, really expensive. You also have Gilding Blast. Now this one I'm not like a huge fan of because this is a percentage-based effect, and therefore it can be dodged with enough status resistance on the other side. Now status resistance is easily manipulated down and it's more difficult to manipulate up, but in the event that your opponent is careful at manipulating their status resistance up a lot, then Gilding Blast can become a miss, but this can be pretty strong when you're getting it early on. The buildings here are mostly just there in case you need to research something quickly in order to get through a tome. You're basically never ever going to build these pieces of infrastructure because they're extremely inefficient. But as I mentioned, the Tome of the Golden Realm, I think the real highlight here is the Gold Golem itself. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at what is probably, in a vacuum, the strongest tier 5 in the game. I think that overall the Shrines of Smiting aren't that difficult to support, and therefore they generally outperform Gold Golems if you are careful to build them up carefully. But if you don't build them up, or the support that you've built around your Shrines of Smiting gets massacred, the Gold Golems are gonna wildly outperform them. So what are we looking at? First of all, we're looking at an elemental. I've heard that this is not going to be true on the next patch and they're going to get a different construct tag, but at the moment they are elementals and that does count very favorably towards them. They also have the Golden Curse ability. Enemy melee attackers have a base 60% chance of becoming gilded, so even if you can't retaliate for whatever reason, then you're going to be able to stun them that way. But you also have unlimited retaliations while you're in defense mode. Like, the only way to get around that, of course, is to hit this thing with a heavy charge strike through their charge resistance, but because we have 145 HP base with 6 defense and 5 resistance, the enemy is probably not going to be able to kill this by just smashing you up. But I think the really big thing about the Gold Golem here is 2 things. First, we have a polearm weapon. The polearm weapon, of course, is going to get us 40% extra damage against cavalry and large target units. But of course, the most important part of this is that you just look through all of the tier 4 and tier 5 units. there are basically none of them that the Gold Golem is not going to be doing extra damage against. Like, you're not going to be doing extra damage against transmuters, but like, that doesn't matter. If you're engaging a transmuter in melee combat with a Gold Golem, you've probably won that fight anyway. And then like practically everybody else here is actually a large target, therefore your Gilded Strike is going to be doing a lot more damage. And of course you have status effect immunity, status effect morale, and critically, because these are currently elementals, this means that if you can get to your tier 5 tome for Materium, they're going to pick up the Undying pick, which means that over the course of a meaningful combat, the Gold Golems are basically going to be invincible. These are outrageously expensive. They do cost 400 gold, and because you're researching them in order to build them rather than to summon them, you do need to have a lot of draft. That is a big ding against Gold Golems and a big ding against the Golden Realm generally. I think that if you're trying to pick up both of the Materium, I think that if you're in a harsh fight with a serious player, you want to take Tome of the Crucible first. If you're on a big map and you have the time to leverage it, take Gold Golem first, just so that way you can start cranking them out. But these do play very well with the Tome of the Creator, kind of no matter what, and I think that's one of the strengths for the Materium Affinity generally, is that A, their Empire tree is really good, and B, their plan is really good and reliable and does instruct itself very well. So the Tome of the Gold Realm, I think this guy is probably an A tier tome, simply because we don't have access to a fantastic spell, and the unit itself is ultimately replaceable. You can get other things that are going to perform not quite as well as the Gold Golem itself, but pretty close. And of course, you know, once they've lost the elemental tag, they're not going to be immortal anymore. But overall, Gold Golems really do punch extremely well, and you really can't go wrong taking either of the Materium tomes when it comes to your tier 4 tomes here in Age of Wonders 4. Alright, last but not least, we have the Tome of the Reaper. Now, the Tome of the Reaper is another one of these undead tomes, therefore it's going to probably want you to be at least in Tome of the Great Transformation in order to get good value out of it. I think taking Tome of the Necromancy is also pretty useful just to get your soul economy really rolling first, but if somehow you haven't picked up any souls yet, you could take Tome of the Reaper here and get Soul Harvest. Just be aware that you probably don't want to do that. That would be really, really late to the soul game. But you do get a fantastically powerful hero ability. This is amazing on the front. The big downside, of course, is that you need 6 battle magic skills in order to unlock it, but if you do that, if you build your hero with this in mind, you get a free action at 4 range that consumes target corpse, heals 40 temporary hit points, and gains 3 strengthened. This is an amazing ability to have on any of your heroes. A lot of the other battle magic things are like, alright, if you are actually a battle mage, then you might want to pick this up, but this one is just great on anyone who is a hero. The downside, of course, is that, as we mentioned, 6 battle magic skills is a lot of work to get here, but if you do it, then this is a lot of survivability, a lot of strength, and a lot of corpse control. Having the ability to strategically annihilate somebody permanently if you've, you know, allowed people to eat corpses from Sleep of Oblivion or the like is actually really good. And even if you're not doing that, just eating the corpse of a phoenix or someone with an Ankh of the Phoenix is actually really, really powerful. Great hero skill. It's just kind of narrow in terms of when you can use it. The Siege Project here is basically skippable. This doesn't do any siege damage, and yes, you do start with 6 extra units, but the 6 units you'd rather just get from Dark Ritual anyway, so like, I don't really care that much. And 40 souls is just nonsense. You want 40 souls, get into a fight. That's generally the best way to get 40 souls. You have Harvest Population. This is a city spell that gets you 10 souls income, but like, the way that souls income works, once you get to Tome of the Reaper, you want to be able to summon a couple of Reapers. Each of them costs 150 souls. You're not going to do that off of a 10 souls income. You need to get souls from fighting people. That's where you're going to get the souls necessary to really use this. So this spell, unfortunately, mostly doesn't do anything. Mostly doesn't do anything here with Mark for Death. Yes, you do get the Mark for Death ability, which is going to kill something after an effect expires. I think this is 2 turns, but even if it's just 1, it's not that great. And even if you do kill somebody, this isn't removing the corpse on its own. You need to do something else to remove that corpse, and then you ultimately just position yourself where you get screwed by someone resurrecting. This is like a worse version of what you get in Tome of Oblivion with the Sleep of Oblivion most of the time. Greater Reanimation is pretty good. You know, the ability to resurrect a non-hero unit at 80% HP and undead can be a big surprise out of a Shadow affinity, but ultimately, hopefully, there are more powerful things you can do as a tactical spell. So like, the real highlight is, I think, the Summon Reaper and the Corpse Consumption ability. So Summon Reaper itself itself. Let's take a look at Reapers. Reapers, as I mentioned, 150 souls means you just are not going to be able to spam these, but fortunately, because of the way they work, you kind of don't want to spam them anyway. Dark Rites, all non-Reaper undead units get plus 10% damage and plus 2 resistance, so this means all of your Whiteborn heroes are going to get that nice little bonus, but if you have 5 Reapers and 1 hero in a stack, then they're all just like seeing each other angrily like cats, and then none of them buff each other, so you get like one of these per stack and then you rock and roll and then you're pretty happy from there. But the Reaper on its own is a pretty strong ability. You get that nice little bonus, you get the greater corpse consumption, which I'm a huge fan of as a hero, and unsurprisingly I'm a big fan of even on this unit here. Their melee strike mostly doesn't do anything, but a 90% chance of inflicting weakened can play pretty well if you're trying to use dark, or if you're just trying to reduce the damage output of a strengthened spam build. But I think the really big nice ability here is you do have Finger of Death. Finger of Death gives you a 60% chance of killing target non-hero enemy unit. If you do something to manipulate status resistance, this can get pretty high. Just be aware that this is a dangerous ability if you position yourself for it. If you're not doing that and you're just taking the 60% chance, it's still not bad. 45 frost damage means that you can use this pretty successfully as an assassinate. And then if a non-undead unit dies from this ability, it transforms into a decaying zombie under your control. Now, on the 4-turn cooldown means you're probably not going to be able to use this more than once, so I would recommend mostly using this against targets that you've either successfully debuffed their status resistance or gotten them to the point where even if it fails, it'll still kill them. But if you can kill somebody and immediately turn it into a decaying zombie in the same action, that is a big swing when it comes to the way that your combat is going to roll out. It's sort of like a mind control effect, except that it can't be debuffed or removed, and therefore I think it's a little better. It's obviously going to give you a much worse unit by the end of it, but this is I think a very, very powerful ability, and I think a very powerful unit. It's just unfortunate that you can't spam them both economically and because they just don't play well with others. But I think overall the Tome of the Reaper is pretty good. It does give you some nice synergies for playing as undead. The problem, of course, is that a lot of what they have here is mostly nonsense, and that means that unfortunately for the Tome of the Reaper, I don't think we can give this any higher than a B tier. I think it's somewhere around here. Maybe it's a little worse than the Tome of Balors ultimately, because Balors are usually a little stronger than Reapers. Yeah, that looks about right. All right, that's our tier 4 tier list for our multiplayer basics series. I do think that there's a lot of debatability when it comes to the S and the A tiers. I think that this is probably the strongest stuff, and you just kind of can rearrange these however you want to, dependent upon what your meta is looking like. Ultimately, of course, depending on what is banned, this is probably the strongest tome in the game, but because Awaken Instincts is usually gone, I think this is an appropriate location for it. But let me know if you guys have played around with any of these tier 4 tomes. If you felt like any of them are wildly misplaced, let me know, because I'm gonna have to, regrade these whenever the new patch comes out anyway. So if there are any good niche cases for them, which I did not highlight, I'm more than happy to build those into the reevaluation once the Golem patch drops. For now, that's Walker here on We Play Games. Take care.